The snowflakes were falling so thick that Beatrice Reynolds could barely see her horse's ears. And that's when she knew she was going to die out here in the Wyoming wilderness. It was December 1883, and she had been traveling from her aunt's house in Cheyenne back to Tonopah Junction when the storm came out of nowhere, transforming the afternoon sky into a whiteout of stinging ice and howling wind. Her hands were numb inside her gloves, and her face felt like frozen porcelain that might crack at any moment. The horse beneath her stumbled again, and Beatrice felt tears freezing on her cheeks as she tried to squint through the blinding whiteness for any sign of shelter. She was 22 years old and had never been beautiful, or so her stepmother had told her repeatedly since she was 12. Beatrice had believed those words so thoroughly that she barely looked at herself in mirrors anymore, just enough to pin her mousy brown hair back and make sure her face was clean. She kept her eyes downcast when men were around, certain that if they looked at her too long, they would see all the flaws her stepmother had catalogued over the years. The too wide mouth, the unremarkable brown eyes, the freckles that dusted her nose like scattered grain, the body that was too thin in some places and too curved in others. The horse whinnied in distress, and Beatrice patted its neck with a trembling hand. "I know, girl, I know." Her voice was barely audible over the wind. She had been riding for what felt like hours since the storm hit, completely lost, praying for a miracle she didn't deserve. Good things didn't happen to plain, forgettable women like her. That's what she had learned in 22 years of living. Just when she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, when the cold had seeped so deep into her bones that sleep seemed like a sweet surrender, she saw a dim glow through the white curtain of snow. At first she thought it was a hallucination, but the light grew stronger as her horse plodded forward. It was a building, a ranch house with lamplight in the windows, smoke rising from a chimney to be torn away by the violent wind. Beatrice tried to call out, but her voice was too weak. She urged her horse toward the house, hope and fear warring in her chest. The ranch looked well kept even through the storm, with a large barn nearby and fencing that suggested prosperity. She slid from her horse and nearly collapsed, her legs refusing to hold her weight. She stumbled to the front porch and pounded on the door with the last of her strength, then crumpled against the wooden boards. The door opened and warmth rushed out. Beatrice looked up through snow-crusted eyelashes to see a man silhouetted against the golden lamplight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and she couldn't make out his features before he was kneeling beside her. "Good Lord, madam, you're half frozen." His voice was deep and warm, concerned without being pitying. Strong arms lifted her as though she weighed nothing, and Beatrice found herself being carried into the house. The sudden warmth was painful after so long in the cold. She was set down in a chair near a roaring fireplace, and the man quickly went back outside. Through the window she could see him leading her horse toward the barn, his figure disappearing into the white chaos. Beatrice sat shivering violently, unable to do anything but huddle near the fire. The room around her was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and Navajo rugs on the wooden floor. Everything was neat and clean in a way that suggested a careful hand. The walls were thick logs chinked tight against the weather, and the fire was well tended, putting out tremendous heat. The door burst open again, and the man came back in, covered in snow. He shut the door firmly against the wind and turned to look at her properly for the first time. Beatrice found herself looking up at a face that was weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with dark hair and startling blue eyes that looked at her with genuine concern. There was a kindness in his expression that made something in her chest ache. "Your horse is in the barn with food and water," She'll be fine." He moved toward her, pulling off his heavy coat. "We need to get you warmed up proper. Can you tell me your name, madam?" Beatrice Reynolds," she managed through chattering teeth. "I was traveling from Cheyenne to Tanapa Junction. The storm came up so fast. It did that." He knelt in front of her and began carefully removing her wet gloves. His hands were large and calloused but surprisingly gentle. "I'm Wade Brennan. This is my ranch, the Double B. You're about 15 miles northwest of Tanapa Junction, so you got turned around pretty good in that whiteout." Beatrice tried to pull her hands back, embarrassed by the contact, by her own helplessness. "I'm sorry to impose. I didn't know where else to go." "Impose?" Wade looked up at her with those blue eyes, and something like surprise crossed his face. "Madam, you're not imposing. You'd have died out there in another hour. I'm glad you found the place." He stood and went to a cabinet, pulling out thick blankets. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes. I'll step into the other room and you can change into some dry things. They'll be too big, but at least they'll be warm." He disappeared through a doorway and returned with a stack of clothes that looked like they might be long underwear and a heavy shirt. He set them on a table near the fire and then turned his back. "I'll give you privacy. Just call out when you're decent." Beatrice's fingers were so numb and stiff that she could barely work the buttons on her traveling dress. The wet fabric clung to her skin, and she fumbled desperately, tears of frustration joining the melted snow on her face. After a long minute of struggling, she heard Wade clear his throat. "Madam, are you able to manage? No shame in needing help. You've been in the cold a long time." The shame of it burned through her, but Beatrice knew she had no choice. "I cannot feel my fingers properly. I'll help you, but I promise to be respectful. I've got 3 sisters back in Colorado, so I understand about propriety." His voice was steady and kind as he turned around. He kept his eyes on her hands as he helped with the buttons, his movements efficient and impersonal. When he had helped her out of the worst of the wet clothes, he turned his back again, and Beatrice managed to pull on the dry garments with shaking hands. They smelled like soap and sunshine, and the warmth of them made her want to weep with relief. "Thank you," she whispered when she was dressed. The long underwear bagged on her frame and the shirt hung nearly to her knees, but she had never been more grateful for anything. Wade turned back and nodded, wrapping one of the thick blankets around her shoulders. "I'll make you something hot to drink. Coffee or tea? Tea, please." Beatrice watched as he moved to the kitchen area, his movements practiced and sure. He built up the fire in the cook stove and set a kettle on to boil, then began assembling items for a meal. She realized she was staring and dropped her gaze to her lap, heat flooding her face. She shouldn't look at him so directly. Men didn't like to be stared at by plain women. "That storm came out of nowhere," Wade said as he worked, his voice conversational and easy. "I've been ranching here for 6 years, and I've never seen one come up so fast. Usually you can see them building on the horizon, but this one just dropped on us like a curse. You're lucky you found shelter when you did." "God must have guided my horse," Beatrice said softly. "I couldn't see anything. I was certain I would die out there." Wade turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Well, you didn't die. You're safe here and you'll stay until this storm passes and the roads are clear enough for travel. Could be a few days based on how hard it's coming down." Panic fluttered in Beatrice's chest. "A few days." "But I couldn't possibly stay here that long. It wouldn't be proper. You're a bachelor and I'm an unmarried woman. The scandal would ruin both our reputations. Miss Reynolds, the only alternative is you dying frozen in a snowbank. I think God and decent people would understand that survival trumps propriety." Wade poured boiling water over tea leaves in a pot and brought it to steep. "Besides, who's going to know? The storm's got us cut off from everything." By the time anyone finds out you were here, the circumstances will be clear. No one with any sense would think ill of it. He was right, of course, but Beatrice still felt the weight of impropriety pressing down on her. Her stepmother would have hysterics if she knew. But then, her stepmother had hysterics over everything Beatrice did, so perhaps it didn't matter. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and nodded. Wade brought her tea in a thick ceramic mug and their fingers brushed as she took it. The touch sent an odd little spark through her and she jerked back, nearly spilling the hot liquid. Wade didn't seem to notice, turning back to his cooking. Beatrice sipped the tea gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest and belly. "How long were you out in the storm?" Wade asked, cutting thick slices from a loaf of bread. "I'm not certain. 2 hours, perhaps 3. Time seemed strange out there. I left my aunt's house this morning before the weather turned. I was supposed to be home by afternoon. Your family will be worried." "I have no family in Tanapa Junction. I work as a seamstress there. I have a small room above the dress shop where I'm employed." Beatrice said it matter-of-factly, but inside she felt the familiar hollow ache of loneliness. "I was visiting my aunt in Cheyenne for Thanksgiving. My employer gave me a week away, but I need to return. There are orders waiting." Wade placed sliced bread in a pan with butter and set it to toast. "Well, Mrs. Donnelly at the dress shop will understand when you explain. Can't control the weather." Beatrice was surprised he knew her employer's name, but then realized that in a town the size of Tanapa Junction, most people probably knew each other. She watched Wade move around his kitchen with easy competence, frying eggs and bacon to go with the toast. The domestic scene was unexpectedly comfortable, and Beatrice felt herself beginning to relax despite her exhaustion. When the food was ready, Wade brought 2 plates to a small table near the fire and gestured for her to join him. Beatrice stood on trembling legs and made her way to the table, sitting carefully. The smell of the food made her stomach growl loudly, and she pressed a hand to it in embarrassment. "Don't be shy about eating. You need food after what you've been through." Wade sat across from her and bowed his head briefly in a quiet blessing, then picked up his fork. Beatrice tried to eat delicately. The way her stepmother had insisted was proper for ladies, but she was so hungry that she found herself devouring the food with less grace than she intended. Wade didn't seem to notice or care, eating his own meal with the efficient appetite of a working man. "This is delicious," Beatrice said quietly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Brennan." "Wade," he corrected. "Given that we're going to be housemates for a few days, I think we can dispense with the formalities. And you're welcome, Beatrice. That's a pretty name." No one had ever told her she had a pretty name before. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she kept her eyes on her plate. "It was my grandmother's name. It suits you." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, just continued eating. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the wind howled and snow pelted against the windows, but inside the cabin was warm and safe. Beatrice found herself stealing glances at Wade when she thought he wasn't looking. He had strong features, a straight nose and a firm jaw covered with a few days' worth of dark stubble. His hands were scarred and weathered from hard work, and there was an air of competence about him that was reassuring. When they finished eating, Wade cleared the plates and Beatrice tried to help, but he waved her back to the chair by the fire. "You're still recovering. Rest yourself." "I'm not an invalid," Beatrice protested weakly, but in truth she was exhausted. The warmth and food had made her realize just how drained she was. "No, but you've had a hard day and you need to rest." Wade's tone was gentle but firm. "I've got a spare room. It's not fancy, but the bed's comfortable. Why don't you go lie down for a while?" Beatrice wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion washed over her. She nodded and stood, swaying slightly. Wade was there in an instant, his hand on her elbow to steady her. "Easy now. This way." He guided her through a doorway into a small bedroom. It held a neatly made bed covered with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out onto the white chaos of the storm. Wade lit a lamp on the dresser, casting a warm glow through the room. "This was meant to be a guest room, though I haven't had many guests. You'll be comfortable here." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered. She felt strange being in a bedroom with a man, even though nothing improper was happening. The intimacy of it made her heart race. "I'll be in the main room if you need anything. Don't hesitate to call out." Wade moved to the door and paused, turning back to look at her. In the lamplight, his eyes were very blue, and there was something in his expression that Beatrice couldn't quite read. "I'm glad you're safe, Beatrice. When I saw you collapsed on my porch, I feared the worst. But you're a strong woman to have survived that storm as long as you did." Before she could respond, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Beatrice stood in the middle of the room, her heart doing strange things in her chest. A strong woman. No one had ever called her strong before. Invisible, yes. Plain, certainly. Forgettable always. But never strong. She climbed into the bed, still wearing Wade's oversized clothes, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, probably goose down, and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind kept replaying the evening, Wade's kindness, his gentle hands helping her with her buttons, the way he had called her strong and said her name was pretty. She tried to push the thoughts away. He was just being kind to someone in need. It meant nothing. Men like Wade Brennan, men who owned successful ranches and had kind eyes and strong hands, didn't notice women like her. And even if they did, it would only be in passing, the way you might notice a sparrow on a fence post before turning your attention to more interesting things. Beatrice had learned long ago not to hope for things she couldn't have. Hope only led to disappointment, and she had experienced enough disappointment to last a lifetime. Her father had died when she was 10, and her mother had remarried within a year to a man who barely tolerated Beatrice's presence. Her stepmother had made it clear from the beginning that Beatrice was a burden, an unfortunate obligation that came with her new husband. When Beatrice's father died 2 years later, her stepmother's true nature had fully emerged. The years from 12 to 20 had been a lesson in invisibility. Beatrice had learned to make herself small, to speak quietly, to never draw attention. Her stepmother had critiqued everything about her appearance, her manner, her very existence, until Beatrice believed that she was fundamentally flawed in ways that could never be fixed. When she finally escaped to Tonopah Junction at 20 years old, taking the position at the dress shop, she had felt like a prisoner granted parole. But the lessons learned in those years had stayed with her, embedded deep in her bones. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and Beatrice finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams full of snow and blue eyes and a voice calling her strong. When she woke, it was fully dark outside, and for a moment, Beatrice didn't remember where she was. Panic seized her until memory returned and she sat up, disoriented. The lamp had been extinguished, but there was a faint glow coming from under the door. She could hear sounds from the main room, the crackle of the fire and the soft clank of dishes. Beatrice got out of bed and smoothed down the oversized shirt she wore. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. She tried to finger-comb it into some semblance of order but gave up after a moment. What did it matter? Wade had already seen her at her worst. She opened the door and stepped into the main room. Wade was sitting at the table with a ledger book open in front of him, making entries by the light of 2 oil lamps. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Good, you're awake. How do you feel?" "Much better, thank you." Beatrice moved toward the fire, which had been built up high. "How long did I sleep?" "About 4 hours. It's near about 8 o'clock in the evening." Wade closed his ledger and stood. "I saved you some stew if you're hungry. Made it this afternoon before the storm hit." "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother, Beatrice. Stop saying that." There was no irritation in Wade's voice, just patient firmness. He went to the stove and ladled thick stew into a bowl, bringing it to the table with more of the bread from earlier. "Come eat." Beatrice sat and accepted the food gratefully. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned with herbs that made her mouth water. Wade sat across from her again, not eating but simply keeping her company. "The storm's still going strong," he said, nodding toward the window where snow continued to pile against the glass. "Might be one of the worst I've seen. We're well provisioned here, though. Plenty of food, plenty of firewood. Don't worry about anything." "You manage this ranch alone?" Beatrice asked, then immediately worried she was being too forward. But Wade didn't seem to mind the question. "Mostly. I have 2 hands who help during branding and roundup, but they've got their own places to weather the winter. I prefer it quiet, truth be told. I came out here from Colorado 6 years back, bought this land and built it up from nothing. It's not a huge operation, but it's mine, and it provides a good living." "You must be very capable to manage all alone." Wade shrugged. "I learned young. My father had a ranch in Colorado, and I worked it from the time I could walk. When he passed, it went to my older brother, which was right and proper. I wanted to build something of my own anyway. Wyoming seemed like the place to do it." "You miss your family?" "Sometimes. I've got 3 sisters, like I mentioned, and 2 brothers. We write letters, but I haven't been back to visit in 2 years. The ranch keeps me busy, especially in summer." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those blue eyes. "What about you?" "You mentioned an aunt in Cheyenne, but no other family." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. "My parents are both deceased. I have the aunt in Cheyenne and a stepmother and 2 stepsisters in St. Louis, but we're not close. I prefer my own company." Something in Wade's expression shifted, became gentler. "That's lonely, though, isn't it? Having no one close." The directness of the question caught Beatrice off guard. Most people didn't ask things like that, didn't probe beneath the surface of polite conversation. She looked down at her stew, her appetite fading. "I'm accustomed to it." "That's not the same as liking it." "No," Beatrice admitted quietly. "It's not." She forced herself to take another bite of stew to swallow past the lump in her throat. "But we don't always get what we like in life. We get what we get, and we make the best of it." Wade was quiet for a long moment. When Beatrice dared to look up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. It wasn't an unkind look, but it was searching, as though he was trying to see past her defenses to something deeper. "You're a lot younger than your words," he said finally. "You talk like someone who's already given up on things." "I'm not young. I'm 22. That's young." "I'm 28, and I still feel like I'm just starting to figure things out." Wade stood and went to pour himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "And you haven't answered my observation. Why do you talk like life's already over?" Beatrice felt something defensive rise up in her chest. "I don't talk like that." "You do, though. You apologize for existing. You act like you're a burden just by being here, when the truth is you're a person in need, and helping you is the right thing to do. There's no shame in needing help, Beatrice." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She wasn't going to cry in front of this man she barely knew, wasn't going to fall apart just because he was being kind. She had more dignity than that. "You don't know anything about me." No, I don't. But I'd like to, if you'd be willing to share. Wade came back to the table with his coffee and sat down. His expression was open, inviting. We're going to be stuck here together for a few days. Might as well be friendly about it. Beatrice wanted to retreat, to pull back into the safe shell she had built around herself over the years. But something in Wade's eyes, some genuine kindness and interest, made her hesitate. When was the last time someone had actually wanted to know about her? When was the last time someone had looked at her like she was interesting, worth talking to? What would you like to know? She heard herself ask. Whatever you want to tell me. How did you end up in Tanapa Junction? Do you like being a seamstress? What do you do for fun? Wade wrapped his hands around his coffee mug and waited. Beatrice took a breath and began to talk. Haltingly at first, then with growing ease, she told him about her life. About her father's death and her mother's remarriage, though she left out the worst of her stepmother's cruelty. About learning to sew from her maternal grandmother before she died, and how the skill had eventually given her a way to escape. About moving to Tanapa Junction 2 years ago and finding the position with Mrs. Donnelly, who was kind in a brisk, no-nonsense way. About the small room above the shop that was the first space that had ever been truly her own. Wade listened without interrupting, his attention never wavering. When she finally ran out of words, feeling embarrassed at how much she had revealed, he nodded slowly. Sounds like you've had a harder time than most, he said, but you made something of yourself anyway. That takes courage. I didn't have a choice. We always have choices. Some of them aren't good choices, but they exist. You could have stayed with your stepmother, let her grind you down to nothing. But you didn't. You left, made your own way. That's courage, Beatrice, whether you want to call it that or not. Beatrice didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of her escape to Tanapa Junction as courageous. It had felt like simple survival, like a mouse fleeing a cat. But hearing Wade frame it differently made something shift in her chest, some small locked door creaking open just a fraction. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Beatrice would have thought possible. Wade told her about building the ranch, about the first brutal winter when he nearly gave up, about the satisfaction of seeing his herd grow year by year. He talked about his sisters with obvious affection, and about his dreams of eventually expanding the ranch, maybe building a larger house, starting a family. You want children? Beatrice asked, then immediately felt her face heat. I'm sorry, that was too personal. No, it's fine, and yes, I do. Someday, when I find the right woman. Wade looked into the fire, his expression thoughtful. This life can be lonely, like you said. I'd like to share it with someone, build something together. I want kids running around, want to teach them the way my father taught me. Want to sit on that porch when I'm old, and know that what I built will continue after I'm gone. It was a beautiful dream, and Beatrice felt an unexpected pang of longing as he described it. She had never let herself dream of such things. Marriage and children and a home of her own had always seemed like fantasies meant for other women, prettier women, women who knew how to laugh and flirt and capture a man's attention. She was not one of those women, and she had made her peace with that, or so she had thought. But sitting here in Wade's warm cabin, listening to him talk about his hopes for the future, Beatrice felt the old longing stir. What would it be like to be loved, to be chosen, to be wanted? What would it be like to build a life with someone instead of always being alone? She pushed the thoughts away firmly. Wade was being kind and friendly, nothing more. She was a stranger who had stumbled onto his porch in a storm, and he was decent enough to help her. In a few days the weather would clear, and she would return to her small room above the dress shop, and Wade would continue with his life, looking for the right woman. Someone beautiful and charming and worthy of his dreams, not someone like her. The fire crackled and popped, and outside the wind continued its relentless howl. Wade stood and stretched. "I should let you get back to sleep. Tomorrow I'll need to check on the animals in the barn, make sure they have enough feed and water. The snow will probably keep coming for another day at least." Beatrice stood as well, suddenly awkward. "Thank you for the stew and for talking with me. It was nice." "It was nice for me too." Wade smiled at her, and Beatrice felt her heart skip. He had a wonderful smile, warm and genuine. "Sleep well, Beatrice." She retreated to the guest room and climbed back into bed, but sleep was long in coming. Her mind kept replaying the evening, every word Wade had said, every look he had given her. She told herself not to read anything into it, not to hope for anything beyond basic human kindness. But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, had already begun to hope. The next morning Beatrice woke to pale gray light filtering through the window. The storm was still raging, though perhaps not quite as violently as the night before. She could hear Wade moving around in the main room, the sound of the stove being stoked and wood being added to the fire. She got out of bed and realized her traveling clothes from yesterday were dry now, hanging over a chair near a small heating grate she hadn't noticed before. Wade must have brought them in and set them to dry. The thoughtfulness of the gesture made her throat tight. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, relieved to be back in things that fit properly, though she found herself missing the scent of Wade's shirt. When she emerged from the room, Wade looked up from the stove where he was frying bacon. His eyes swept over her and something crossed his face, an expression Beatrice couldn't quite name. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you." Beatrice moved toward the fire to warm her hands. "The storm hasn't stopped." "No, and I don't think it will for a while yet. I need to get out to the barn soon, make sure the livestock are holding up. The cattle should be fine in the near pasture where there's some shelter from the wind, but I want to check on them." Wade plated the bacon and started on eggs. "After breakfast, I'll bundle up and head out. Shouldn't take more than an hour. Is there anything I can do to help while you're gone? You could keep the fires going. There's wood stacked by the door. Don't go outside, though. It's too easy to get turned around in weather like this." He brought breakfast to the table, and they sat together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt oddly domestic. After they ate, Wade dressed in heavy layers, wrapping a thick scarf around his face and pulling on fur-lined gloves. He looked like a bear, huge and imposing, but his eyes were warm when he looked at Beatrice. "I'll be back soon. Don't worry if it takes a while." "Be careful," Beatrice said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. The thought of Wade getting lost in the storm, freezing to death alone, made her chest constrict with fear. She barely knew this man, but somehow the thought of harm coming to him was unbearable. "I will." Wade opened the door and was immediately hit by a blast of wind and snow. He stepped out into the white chaos and pulled the door shut behind him, leaving Beatrice alone in the cabin. She stood at the window and watched his dark figure disappear toward the barn, swallowed by snow within seconds. Fear gnawed at her insides, but she pushed it down. Wade knew what he was doing. He had survived 6 winters out here on his own. He would be fine. To occupy herself, Beatrice set about tidying the cabin. She washed the breakfast dishes, swept the floor, and reorganized the kitchen area. She found Wade's mending basket tucked in a corner and examined the contents. There were several shirts with torn seams and a pair of pants with a hole in the knee. She settled by the fire with the mending and her own sewing kit, which had survived the storm in her saddlebag, and set to work. The familiar motion of needle and thread through fabric was soothing. This was something she knew, something she was good at. Her stitches were small and even, nearly invisible when she was done. She worked through the pile of mending, losing herself in the rhythm of the work. She was finishing the last shirt when the door burst open and Wade stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow. Beatrice jumped up, alarmed by how much snow had accumulated on him. He must have been out there longer than he intended. "Are you all right?" She rushed over to help him out of his coat, brushing snow away. "I'm fine. Just took longer than expected. Had to dig out the barn door and break ice on the water troughs." Wade's voice was muffled by the scarf. He unwound it, and Beatrice saw that his face was red from the cold, his eyelashes crusted with ice. "The animals are fine, though. Well fed and sheltered. You're frozen. Come sit by the fire." Beatrice took his coat and hung it to dry, then hurried to make hot coffee. Wade sank into the chair by the fire with a groan, holding his hands toward the flames. "That's rough weather. I've seen bad storms, but this one's something else." He accepted the coffee gratefully and wrapped his cold hands around the mug. "We'll be here another couple of days at least." The snows drifted so high in places that travel would be impossible. "I'm glad you made it back safely," Beatrice said softly. She had been more worried than she wanted to admit during the hour he was gone. "I did your mending while you were out. I hope you don't mind." Wade looked over at the neat stack of mended clothes and his eyebrows rose. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. You've been so kind to me. It's the least I could do to repay you." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks under his gaze. "That's fine work," Wade said, examining one of the shirts. "Mrs. Donnelly is lucky to have you." The compliment made Beatrice's heart flutter. She tried to remind herself that he was just being polite, but the warmth in his voice seemed genuine. She busied herself with making soup for lunch, using vegetables and salt pork she found in Wade's well-stocked pantry. As the day wore on, they fell into a comfortable routine. Wade did his ranch bookkeeping while Beatrice prepared meals and kept the cabin tidy. They talked easily about everything and nothing. Wade told her stories about ranching mishaps and close calls, making her laugh with his dry delivery. Beatrice found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did, letting her guard down bit by bit. It wasn't until evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, that things shifted between them. They had been talking about books, discovering a shared love of adventure stories, when Wade suddenly went quiet. Beatrice looked up to find him staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, self-consciously touching her hair. "Do I have something on my face?" "No. I was just thinking that you have a lovely smile. You should let people see it more often." Beatrice froze, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your smile. It lights up your whole face, makes your eyes sparkle. You're beautiful when you smile, Beatrice. You're beautiful when you're not smiling too, but when you smile it's something special." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful. She opened her mouth to protest, to tell him he was wrong, that he was just being kind, but no words would come. She could only stare at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Wade leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest. "I mean it. You're a beautiful woman, and I don't understand why you seem so surprised to hear it. Surely other men have told you as much." "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she fought them back desperately. "No one has ever said that to me. I'm not beautiful. I'm plain and forgettable and unremarkable. Everyone has always said so." "Then everyone is blind." Wade's voice was firm, almost angry. "Or cruel, or both." "Beatrice, look at me." She couldn't. She stared at the floor, her hands clenched in her lap. "Please look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Beatrice raised her eyes to meet his. Wade's gaze was steady and sure, and there was no hint of mockery or cruelty in it. Only honesty. "You are beautiful," he said again, slowly and clearly. "You have expressive eyes the color of good earth. Your hair catches the firelight like silk. Your mouth is soft and perfectly shaped. But more than that, you're beautiful in the way you move, graceful and careful. You're beautiful in your kindness, in the way you mended my clothes without being asked, in the way you worry about others. Beauty isn't just a face, Beatrice. It's a whole person, and you are beautiful through and through. A tear escaped and rolled down Beatrice's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just need you to hear it, to believe it. Wade reached across the space between them and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her smaller, softer hand. Someone taught you to think poorly of yourself. Someone made you believe you weren't worth noticing. But they were wrong, Beatrice. They were so wrong. More tears came now, faster than Beatrice could wipe them away. Years of pain and self-loathing were cracking open inside her chest, and she didn't know how to stop it. She tried to pull her hand away, but Wade held on gently, not forcing but not letting go. It's all right to cry, he said softly. Sometimes we need to. And so Beatrice cried, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the little girl who had been told she was a burden. She cried for the teenager who had learned to make herself invisible. She cried for the young woman who had never believed she deserved love or kindness or beauty. Wade didn't say anything else, just held her hand and let her cry, his presence solid and comforting. When the storm of tears finally passed, Beatrice felt drained but somehow lighter. She wiped her face with her free hand, embarrassed but not quite as mortified as she would have expected. Wade had seen her at her most vulnerable, and he was still here, still holding her hand, still looking at her with kindness in his blue eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. You needed that. Wade squeezed her hand gently and then released it, sitting back in his chair. Beatrice, I don't know what you've been through, not really, but I know pain when I see it. And I know that whoever made you feel less than beautiful, less than worthy, they damaged something precious. But damage can be healed. You just have to believe you're worth healing. I don't know if I can believe that. Then let me believe it for you until you can believe it for yourself. Wade's voice was gentle but certain. You're worth kindness, Beatrice. You're worth love and respect and all the good things life has to offer. And you are beautiful, whether you believe it or not. Something shifted inside Beatrice in that moment. She didn't suddenly believe she was beautiful, didn't suddenly erase 22 years of being told otherwise. But a tiny seed of possibility was planted, a whisper of maybe that she had never allowed herself before. Maybe Wade was right. Maybe she was worth more than she had been taught to believe. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Beatrice felt raw and vulnerable, but also strangely safe. Wade had seen her break down and hadn't turned away. He had offered her truth and kindness, and she found herself wanting to believe him more than she had wanted anything in a long time. Thank you, she said finally, for saying those things, even if I don't fully believe them yet. Yet, Wade repeated with a small smile. That's a start. That night, lying in the guest bed, Beatrice replayed Wade's words over and over. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful and he had meant it. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, hear it in his voice. And while years of conditioning made it hard to accept, made her want to argue and deny, she found herself starting to wonder. What if he was right? What if she had been lied to all these years? What if she was actually worth something? The thoughts were dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. They opened up possibilities she had never dared to consider, and they made her realize something else, something that both excited and terrified her. She was falling for Wade Brennan. This kind, strong, honest man who had taken her in and cared for her and told her she was beautiful. She was falling for him, and she had no idea what to do about it, because surely he didn't feel the same way. He was just being kind, helping someone in need. Once the storm passed and she returned to Tanapa Junction, he would forget about her. He would find the right woman to share his dreams with, someone confident and lovely and worthy of him. Someone who wasn't plain, timid Beatrice Reynolds. But even as she tried to convince herself of this, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. What if he did feel something? What if the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the sincerity in his words, what if it meant something more than simple kindness? Beatrice pushed the thought away. She couldn't let herself hope for that. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to heartbreak, but despite her best efforts, hope was already taking root. The third day dawned clearer than the previous two. The snow had finally stopped falling, though the wind still blew drifts into strange sculptural shapes. Wade went out early to tend the animals again, and Beatrice made breakfast and tidied the cabin. She had taken to wearing an apron she found hanging on a peg, and it felt oddly right to be keeping house, even if it was temporary. When Wade came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he looked pleased. The worst of it has passed. Another day for the drifts to settle and the wind to die down, and then the day after that the roads should be passable. I can take you back to Tanapa Junction then. Beatrice's heart sank. She should have been relieved, happy to be able to return to her normal life. Instead, she felt a crushing sense of loss. 2 more days and this strange, wonderful interlude would be over. 2 more days and she would leave Wade and his warm cabin and his kind words behind. That's good news, she made herself say. I'm sure Mrs. Donnelly is wondering what happened to me. I'll explain everything when I bring you back. She'll understand. Wade came to the fire to warm his hands, standing close to Beatrice. Though I have to admit, I'll miss having company. It's been nice having someone to talk to, someone to cook for. Gets lonely out here sometimes. I'll miss it too, Beatrice admitted quietly. You've been very kind. Wade looked down at her and something flickered in his eyes. It's not just kindness, Beatrice, her breath caught. What do you mean? I mean I've enjoyed your company, more than enjoyed it. These past few days, getting to know you, I've found myself thinking that I don't want them to end. Wade reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I like you, Beatrice, more than I probably should after such a short time. Beatrice's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. You do, I do. You're intelligent and kind and interesting to talk to. You're gentle but stronger than you realize. And yes, you're beautiful, though I know you still don't believe that. His thumb stroked her cheek softly. I know this is sudden. I know you barely know me. But I'd like to see you again after you go back to town, if you'd be willing. I'd like to court you properly, Beatrice. Beatrice couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. Men like Wade didn't court women like her. And yet here he was, looking at her with warmth and hope in his blue eyes, asking permission to court her. Why? The word came out broken and confused. Why me? Because you're you. Because talking with you is easy and comfortable. Because I like the way your mind works and the way you see the world. Because when I think about finding the right woman to share my life with, to build a future with, I find myself thinking about you. Wade's hand cupped her cheek fully now, warm and gentle. I know you don't think much of yourself, but I see something wonderful in you, Beatrice. Something worth knowing, worth caring for. Will you let me court you? Beatrice wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being was screaming yes. But fear held her back, the old familiar fear of not being good enough, of being rejected, of hoping for something only to have it snatched away. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of what? Of believing this is real, of letting myself hope, of being hurt. The words came tumbling out, raw and honest. What if you realize you made a mistake? What if you discover I'm as plain and boring as everyone always said? What if I'm not who you think I am? Beatrice, look at me. Wade waited until her eyes met his. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not some boy with a passing fancy. I'm a grown man who knows what he wants, and I want to get to know you better. I want to court you and see where this goes. And I promise you, I see exactly who you are. I'm not imagining something that isn't there. I'm seeing the real you, and the real you is wonderful. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope, of possibility, of something that might be joy. I want to believe you. Then try. Just try, Beatrice. Give me a chance. Give yourself a chance. Wade leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. Say yes. Please say yes. Yes, Beatrice breathed. Yes, I'll let you court me. Wade's smile was brilliant, lighting up his whole face. He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. And then slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent electricity singing through Beatrice's whole body. She had never been kissed before and hadn't known what to expect, but this exceeded anything she could have imagined. Wade's lips were warm and soft against hers, and the kiss tasted like coffee and promise. When he pulled back, Beatrice felt dazed, her hand coming up to touch her lips in wonder. Wade was watching her with tender amusement. Was that all right? He asked. It was perfect, Beatrice whispered. They spent the rest of that day in a kind of golden haze. Wade had ranch work to attend to, but he found excuses to stay inside to be near Beatrice. They talked and laughed, and Wade kissed her twice more, each kiss a little less tentative, a little more sure. Beatrice felt like she was walking on clouds, like she had stepped into a dream and didn't want to wake up. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Wade pulled her into his side and she rested her head on his shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. Tell me about your dreams, Wade said, his arm around her shoulders. What do you want from life, Beatrice? No one had ever asked her that before. Beatrice had to think about it, sorting through years of suppressed wishes and denied hopes. I want to belong somewhere, she said finally. I want a home, a real home, not just a room. I want to be with people who care about me, who want me around. I want to matter to someone. She paused, gathering courage. And I want children. I've always loved children. I'd like to have a family of my own someday, to give them all the love I never had growing up. Those are beautiful dreams, Wade said softly. And they're all possible, Beatrice. You could have all of that. Could I have it with you? The question was bold, far bolder than Beatrice would normally dare, but Wade's presence and his acceptance had made her braver. Wade turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. I can't make promises after only 3 days. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. But I can tell you that when I imagine my future now, you're in it. I see you here in this house or in the bigger house I want to build. I see you at my table and in my bed and holding our babies. It's fast, Beatrice, maybe too fast. But it feels right in a way nothing else ever has. So yes, I think you could have all those dreams with me, if we both want it, if we both work for it. Beatrice felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. Happy tears this time, tears of joy and relief and hope. I want it, she said firmly. I know it's fast too, but I want it. I want all of it with you. Wade kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand tangling in her hair. Beatrice kissed him back with all the hope and happiness surging through her, trying to pour everything she felt into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. We'll take our time, do this properly. I'll come calling in town, bring you flowers, take you on walks. We'll give people time to see us together, avoid scandal. But Beatrice, I need you to know something. What? I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast, but I am. I'm falling for you hard, and I wanted you to know." Beatrice's heart felt like it might burst. "I'm falling in love with you too. I have been since you called me beautiful. Maybe even before that, when you helped me with my buttons and didn't make me feel ashamed. I've never felt this way before, Wade. It scares me, but it's also wonderful." "It's wonderful and scary both," Wade agreed. "But we'll figure it out together." They stayed up late into the night, talking and planning and stealing kisses. Wade told her about his plans to expand the ranch, and Beatrice shyly shared her secret dream of opening her own dress shop someday, being her own employer. Wade thought it was a wonderful idea, and immediately began suggesting ways to make it happen, treating her dream as valid and worthwhile. By the time Beatrice finally went to bed, she felt like a different person than the one who had arrived 3 days ago. That woman had been closed off and afraid, certain of her own unworthiness. This new Beatrice was beginning to believe she might be worth something after all. She might even be beautiful. The next day, the wind finally died down completely, and the sun came out brilliant and blinding on the vast expanse of white. Wade went out to check the roads and came back with the news that travel would be possible the following morning. The snow was still deep, but packed hard enough that a horse could manage it. Beatrice should have been happy, but instead she felt a hollow ache in her chest. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay here in this warm cabin with Wade, wrapped in their fragile new happiness. The real world felt threatening, full of people who would tell her she was foolish, who would say a woman like her could never keep a man like Wade. Wade sensed her mood and pulled her close. "It's not goodbye, Beatrice. It's just until I can come calling properly. A few days at most. I need to make sure the herd is settled after the storm, but then I'll come to town. I'll talk to Mrs. Donnelly, make sure everyone knows my intentions are honorable, and I'll see you every chance I get. Promise." "I promise." He kissed her forehead. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." They spent that last day together quietly, both reluctant to waste a moment. Wade taught Beatrice how to make his mother's bread recipe, and they laughed as flour ended up in her hair and on his face. They played cards, and Wade pretended not to notice when Beatrice cheated, which made her laugh until she couldn't breathe. They stood on the porch in the afternoon, watching the sun sparkle on the snow, and Wade stood behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist, keeping her warm. That evening after supper, Wade sat her down with a serious expression. "I have something for you." He went to his bedroom and returned with a small wooden box. When he opened it, Beatrice saw a delicate silver locket on a chain. It was simple but beautiful, engraved with tiny flowers. "This was my grandmother's," Wade said. "My mother gave it to me before I left Colorado, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to marry." He held it up, the silver catching the firelight. "It's too soon for a ring, I know that. We need time to court properly to be sure. But I want you to have this as a promise that I'm serious about you, about us. A promise that I'll come calling, that I'll court you properly, that I'll work to earn your trust and your love." Beatrice couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She turned so Wade could fasten the locket around her neck. It settled cool against her skin, just above her heart. When she turned back, Wade was watching her with such tenderness that she had to blink back tears. "It's beautiful," she managed. "Thank you, Wade. I'll treasure it." "You're beautiful," Wade corrected gently. "The locket is just silver. You're the treasure, Beatrice. Don't forget that." They kissed until the fire burned low, holding each other close, both trying to memorize every moment before they had to part. When Beatrice finally went to bed that night, she clutched the locket in her hand, feeling its weight as a tangible reminder that this was real. Wade cared for her. He was falling in love with her, and somehow, impossibly, she believed it. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Wade loaded Beatrice's saddlebags onto her horse while she wrapped herself in every warm layer she owned. Mrs. Donnelly would wonder where she had been, what had happened, but Beatrice found she didn't much care about the scandal. She had Wade, or was beginning to have him, and that mattered more than propriety. Wade helped her onto her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'll be right behind you the whole way, making sure you get there safe. And then I'll see you in 3 days when I come calling. Is evening all right?" After the shop closes, evening is perfect. Beatrice looked down at him, this man who had changed everything for her in less than a week. "Thank you, Wade, for everything, for saving my life, for your kindness, for seeing me. Thank you for stumbling onto my porch." Wade's smile was soft and warm. "Best storm I ever weathered." They rode out together, Wade on his big sorrel gelding and Beatrice on her mare. The landscape was transformed by snow, familiar landmarks turned strange and beautiful. The journey that should have taken a few hours took most of the day as they navigated drifts and icy patches, but Beatrice didn't mind. Every moment with Wade was precious. When they finally reached the outskirts of Tonopah Junction, Wade pulled his horse alongside hers. "This is where I should turn back. Don't want to start gossip before I've had a chance to explain things properly." Beatrice nodded, understanding but hating it. 3 days, 3 days, Wade confirmed. He leaned over and kissed her one more time, quick and sweet. "Remember what I told you, Beatrice. You're beautiful and you're worth everything. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'll try to remember." "Good girl." Wade touched his hand to his hat in a little salute, then turned his horse back toward his ranch. Beatrice watched him go until he disappeared from view, then rode the last mile into town. Mrs. Donnelly nearly fainted when Beatrice walked into the shop, full of questions and concern and relief. Beatrice explained about the storm and finding shelter at her ranch, carefully leaving out most of the details. She could see Mrs. Donnelly drawing her own conclusions, but the older woman was kind enough not to voice them. "Just glad you're safe," Mrs. Donnelly said finally. "That storm was vicious. I feared the worst when you didn't come back." Beatrice settled back into her small room above the shop, but it felt different now. Smaller, lonelier. She found herself touching the locket constantly, reassuring herself that it was real, that Wade was real. 3 days seemed like an eternity. She threw herself into work, catching up on the orders that had piled up during her absence. Her fingers flew through seams and hems, but her mind was far away at her ranch in the snow, reliving every conversation, every touch, every kiss. The other girls who worked at the shop noticed her distraction and teased her about it. "Beatrice has been somewhere interesting," one of them said with a knowing smile. "Look at her mooning about." Beatrice blushed but didn't deny it. She caught her reflection in a mirror as she worked and paused, really looking at herself for the first time in years. Was she beautiful? She still didn't quite see it, but she tried to look at herself the way Wade might. Kind eyes, soft mouth, delicate features. Maybe, she thought tentatively. Maybe he was right. 3 days had never passed so slowly. Beatrice worked and ate and slept, but everything felt like waiting. And then, on the evening of the 3rd day, there was a knock at the shop door after closing. "Mrs. Donnelly" answered it, and Beatrice heard a deep male voice asking for Miss Reynolds. Her heart leaped into her throat. She came to the door, and there was Wade, hat in hand, looking nervous but determined. He was cleaned up, freshly shaven, wearing his best clothes. In his other hand he held a small bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers, carefully wrapped. "Miss Reynolds," he said formally, very aware of Mrs. Donnelly hovering in the background. "I was hoping I might call on you this evening, if it's convenient." "It's very convenient, Mr. Brennan." Beatrice tried to keep her voice steady, but she could hear the joy in it. "Please come in." Wade stepped inside and handed her the bouquet. "These are for you. They're lovely. Thank you." Beatrice held the flowers like they were made of gold. Mrs. Donnelly cleared her throat. "Perhaps you two might sit in the shop to visit. I'll be upstairs if needed." She gave Beatrice a meaningful look that said she would be listening, protecting her employees' reputation, but she would also give them some privacy. Wade and Beatrice sat in the shop's small sitting area where customers waited for fittings. For a moment they just looked at each other, drinking in the sight they had both been missing. Then Wade reached across and took Beatrice's hand. "I missed you," he said quietly. "I missed you too. So much." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "Did everything go well at the ranch?" "Everything's fine. The herd came through the storm well, but I have to tell you, that house felt enormous and empty without you in it. I kept turning around to tell you something and you weren't there." Wade's blue eyes were intense on hers. "I meant what I said, Beatrice. I'm serious about courting you, about building a future with you." "I meant what I said too. I want that, Wade. I want a future with you." They talked for an hour, sitting in the darkening shop, hands clasped together. Wade told her about the work at the ranch and his plans for the spring. Beatrice told him about the orders she was working on and her dreams for her own shop. They talked about everything and nothing, just happy to be together again. When Wade finally left with a promise to return in 2 days, Beatrice floated up to her room. Mrs. Donnelly caught her on the stairs. "That's a good man," the older woman said. "Wade Brennan has a solid reputation. Works hard, pays his debts, treats people fairly. If he's serious about you, Beatrice, you could do a lot worse." "He is serious," Beatrice said, touching her locket. "And so am I." Over the next months, Wade came calling twice a week, regular as clockwork. When the weather was good, they would walk around town together or have a picnic on the outskirts. When it was cold or rainy, they would sit in the shop and talk for hours. Wade was always respectful, always proper, though the kisses they stole when no one was looking became increasingly passionate. Beatrice bloomed under Wade's attention and affection. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently. She started to believe that maybe she was beautiful after all, or at least beautiful to Wade, which was what mattered. The other women in town noticed the change in her and some were jealous, but most were happy for the quiet seamstress who had found love. In April, when the snows had melted and wildflowers were beginning to bloom, Wade took Beatrice on a ride out to his ranch. It was her first time back since the storm, and Beatrice felt her heart squeeze as they rode up to the familiar cabin. Wade helped her down from her horse, and then, to her surprise, dropped to one knee right there in the muddy yard. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Beatrice Reynolds, I have loved you since you appeared on my porch in the middle of a snowstorm. I loved you before I knew your name, before I knew anything about you except that you were in need and I wanted to help. These past months have only deepened that love. You are beautiful and kind and strong, and everything I ever wanted in a partner. Will you marry me? Will you share this ranch and this life with me? Will you let me spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how precious you are?" Beatrice was crying, but they were happy tears this time. She nodded, words failing her, and Wade stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise. "Is that a yes?" he asked when they finally broke apart. "Yes," Beatrice managed through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Wade. I love you so much." They were married in June in a simple ceremony at the small church in Tonopah Junction. Wade's whole family came out from Colorado for the wedding, and Beatrice met his parents and sisters and brothers, all of whom welcomed her warmly into the family. Even Mrs. Donnelly cried during the ceremony, happy to see her quiet seamstress finding happiness. Beatrice wore a wedding dress she had made herself, the finest work she had ever done. Wade said she looked like an angel, and for once Beatrice didn't argue. She let herself believe she was beautiful, standing there in her white dress with flowers in her hair and love shining in her eyes. The wedding night was gentle and sweet, Wade taking his time to show Beatrice how much he loved her, how beautiful she was to him. He worshipped every inch of her with his hands and mouth and words, and by the time the sun rose, Beatrice finally believed. She was beautiful. She was loved. She was home. They settled into married life easily. Beatrice moved into the ranch house and made it a home, adding curtains and rugs and all the small touches that made a house warm. She still did some sewing for Mrs. Donnelly and other women in town, building up her skills and her reputation, working toward her dream of her own shop. Wade expanded the ranch, buying more land and more cattle. He was a good rancher and a better husband, always making time for Beatrice, always telling her he loved her, always making her feel cherished. In the spring of 1885, Beatrice discovered she was expecting their first child. Wade was overjoyed, immediately becoming overprotective and fussy. Beatrice laughed at his worrying but loved him for it. She had never felt so cared for, so precious. Their son was born in November, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. They named him James, after Wade's father. Wade held his son with such tenderness that Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. "You were right," she told Wade one evening as they sat by the fire, the baby asleep in her arms. "About everything. About me being beautiful, about me being worth love, about us having a future together. I didn't believe you at first, but you were right." Wade leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'm always right," he teased, then grew serious. "But you're the one who did the real work, Beatrice. You're the one who had the courage to believe, to take the risk, to open your heart. I just saw what was already there." As the years passed, Wade and Beatrice built a life full of love and laughter. They had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy, and the ranch house was always full of noise and activity. Beatrice opened her dress shop in Tonopah Junction when their youngest started school, and it became one of the most successful businesses in town. Wade never stopped telling Beatrice she was beautiful. Even when she was tired and covered in flour from baking, even when she was heavy with pregnancy, even when gray started to thread through her brown hair, he told her every single day that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And Beatrice believed him, because she could see the truth of it in his eyes, in his touch, in the way he loved her completely and without reservation. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children all gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house Wade had built to replace the original cabin was large and comfortable, full of the treasures of a life well lived. Photographs hung on the walls, showing the progression of their years together. Children's drawings were framed like fine art. The furniture was worn and comfortable, used and loved. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, and the adult children had returned to their own homes, Wade and Beatrice sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. Beatrice still wore the locket Wade had given her that first week, though it now held photographs of their children. The gold wedding band on her finger was scratched and worn from 25 years of wear, but she never took it off. "You remember the storm?" Wade asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember everything about that week." Beatrice leaned into his warmth. "I was so lost, Wade, not just in the snow, but in my life. I didn't know who I was or what I was worth. And then you found me." "You found me," Wade corrected. "You stumbled onto my porch half frozen and you changed my life. I had been waiting for you, Beatrice, even though I didn't know it." waiting for the right woman, the one who would make this ranch a home, who would fill my days with purpose and my nights with warmth. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying. You told me I was beautiful and I didn't believe you, but you believe me now. Beatrice turned to look at her husband, seeing the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the weathering of 53 years of life. He was still the handsomest man she had ever seen, and the kindest and the best. "I believe you now," she said softly. "Not just because you kept telling me, but because you showed me. You showed me every day in 1,000 ways that I was worth loving, that I was beautiful, that I mattered. You gave me a life I never thought I could have, Wade. You gave me everything. You gave me everything, too." Wade kissed her, the kiss of long familiarity and deep love. "And I'd do it all again, Beatrice. Every moment, every choice, every storm, all of it just to end up here with you." As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Beatrice thought about that terrified girl lost in a snowstorm so many years ago. She thought about the cowboy who had taken her in and told her she was beautiful. She thought about the journey from disbelief to acceptance to certainty, the slow healing of deep wounds, the building of a life and a love that had exceeded her wildest dreams. She finally believed, not just in her own beauty, though she had learned to see herself through Wade's loving eyes, but in something more important. She believed in the possibility of change, of healing, of second chances. She believed that sometimes the worst storms led to the greatest blessings. She believed that love, real love, could transform everything. And most of all, she believed that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in Wade's arms on this porch, watching the sunset over their life together. The timid woman who had stumbled out of that long-ago storm was gone, replaced by someone strong and sure and deeply, completely loved. The snowstorm had stranded her at his ranch. The cowboy had said she was beautiful. And finally, blessedly, she believed. Years continued to pass in contentment and joy. Their children grew and married and had children of their own, and the ranch house was frequently full of grandchildren running and playing. Beatrice's dress shop thrived, and she trained young seamstresses, passing on her skills just as her grandmother had once taught her. Wade and Beatrice grew old together gracefully, their love only deepening with time. They weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, always side by side, always partners. When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, their children threw a huge party that half of Tonopah Junction attended. In their 70s, they would still sit on that porch swing in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie. Wade would still tell Beatrice she was beautiful, and she would still believe him, because after all these years, she knew it was true. Not because of her face or her figure, which time had changed, but because of who she was, who they were together. And sometimes, when the snow fell heavy and thick, Beatrice would look out the window and remember that long-ago storm. She would remember being lost and afraid, certain she was going to die. She would remember Wade opening the door, his silhouette against the golden lamplight, and she would marvel at how much life could change in a moment. The storm had been terrifying, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. To Wade, to love, to home. And for that, she would always be grateful. In the end, Wade and Beatrice lived long, happy lives, surrounded by love and family. They left behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom knew the story of how their grandparents met. The tale of the snowstorm and the timid woman and the cowboy who saw her beauty became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. And long after Wade and Beatrice were gone, the story remained, a testament to the power of kindness, the healing nature of love, and the truth that sometimes it takes someone else seeing our beauty before we can see it ourselves. The locket was passed down through generations, and every woman who wore it knew its story, knew that it represented a promise kept, a love that lasted, a life beautifully lived. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, and the dress shop in Tanapa Junction still stood, though it had changed hands several times. But in the hearts and memories of those who knew them, Wade and Beatrice lived on, their love story a reminder that the greatest blessings often come from the worst storms, and that sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "You're beautiful," for you to finally believe it yourself.